Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Super-Fanta-Fi. This being a show where I talk about TV shows of the supernatural, fantasy, and/or science fictional genre. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of Midnight Texas. Another great episode. I feel like this is like the bloodiest episode, isn't it? Just because of the way that thing was, that faceless thing, like cutting off people's faces like that and making them his own. I don't know, that was just kind of brutal, just the blood splatter and everything. That kind of took me by surprise. But obviously, that's like the main enemy of this episode. I don't even think we ever really got to find out what kind of demon he was. Obviously, he was like a servant and stuff like that to this. We finally found out the name of the demon that has been haunting Fiji this entire time. His name is Kokenar. It's actually interesting. It seems like the reason why he's doing all this is because he wants Fiji for himself. So for him, I guess this is kind of like flirting. I guess it's really because it's something we still haven't really dived into too much about, like Fiji's whole situation, like her powers. Is it like a family thing? Like maybe she comes from a long line of like powerful witches or something like that. The reason why he's taking an interest in her, or obviously maybe there's some deeper layer to that that we just don't know about yet. But he's taking an interest in her, and in some twisted way, you can think of all this like haunting her and everything is in a weird way his way of flirting. I guess it's what this is ultimately all about. But obviously, this is a big episode on many different fronts. Obviously, we're seeing a lot of people being affected. Like the Rev is eating meat. Apparently, he's a vegetarian, so it's like that was kind of a red flare. Plus, the fact that Lemuel's getting hungrier. Like as we see throughout the episode, he's constantly checking out Olivia. I mean, obviously, their relationship is a big thing that came out this episode about how like, oh yeah, like the conversation came up about like Creek at first. Like Creek is like, oh, she wants Lem to leech her because her dad ended up giving her the deed to their land while he ended up leaving Midnight. But it's all too much. It's dad, it's just a reminder, but it was like her home. But now, she said it herself, it makes her sick to think about it. It's just that's not her home anymore. She thought working would help things. It didn't. So plus, because most of the episodes she's spending kind of trying to like isolate herself, which Olivia's like, you don't have to do that. She's like, I'm not, but it's like, that's what she's doing. I mean, just because it's like she doesn't know what to do. She's alone, probably Manfred leaving too. Like, even though they were taking their break or whatever, it's still a situation of like, he's the probably like a only shoulder she really had that she felt like she could, like, I think out of anyone in town, like he's probably the one person she's gotten closest to. Like she's close to everyone, but I think if anything she would probably rely more on Manfred than she would go for that. I mean, obviously with the exception in this episode, and that was getting trying to get Lem to leech her, which is obviously like she needed something to help. Like the pain was just too much. She just needed some relief. But Olivia was like, no. Immediately my brain is like, oh yeah, because you don't trust Lem because of the whole like, even giving Bobo like silver bullets to deal with the Rev and him just in case they kind of get out of control. But then it's like, then he's like, why are you speaking for me? She's like, well, the fact is it's Creek. And he's like, are you jealous? She's like, well, if you're doing that, basically almost it's saying like it would undermine everything that they have. It's like him leeching her, it's like their thing, because it's like, oh, you don't just go out and leech whoever you want, you leech me. So it's almost like a special thing between them. So for her, it's almost like cheating. But I think on some level, it's probably that element too. Maybe she just didn't want to let him know. It did seem like the whole leeching thing did kind of bother her, but maybe it is just the whole aspect of maybe Lemuel will lose control. But basically, it comes down to the conversation. He's like, you told me you were going to leave. She's like, not anytime soon. But the fact of the matter is, you told him. Yes, I think on some level, Lemuel just never thought about it. He probably thought on some level that she would all be, Olivia would all be for like, possibly spending the rest of his, well, all of eternity with him, I guess he just assumed, but I guess he never just really took the time to really ask. And now it's brought up a lot of hard facts that he has to deal with, because she doesn't want to be a vampire, which later on he's like, haven't you ever thought about, which is kind of interesting. She brings up the whole like thing about how things have to end. It's the natural order, which is, I mean, we can look at it as like, if you think about it too much, it's almost like a backhanded compliment, because it's like, there's a natural order to things. And well, you're saying he's not right because he's out of that order. Like, I know that's just nitpicking, but it's like, yeah, you could dive too, if you pay too much attention into that. But it's like, she's like, yeah, things are supposed to come and go. That's just life, everything dies, so. Which is kind of interesting, because I've referenced this like in the first episode. I know that particular actress. She's done many different things. I want to say Soul Plane. Was that in the movie? Yeah. Like, wasn't that back in like '05 or '04 or something like that? I think that was the first, I think the actress's name is like, I'm not going to say it because I'm going to end up butchering it, but I think that was the first thing I ever saw her. But obviously the point is, like, she played Lexi in The Vampire Diaries, like one of Stefan's best friends. which she was a vampire in it. So I just thought that was kind of interesting. Just in this show, like, oh yeah, I don't want to be a vampire. I don't know. It's just like when you think about it too much, you're like, oh, you were a vampire before, so you don't want to be a vampire again. Something you think about it too much outside of like the context of the show and just acting and like. I'm gonna shut up now because I'm going off a big tangent. I just thought that was just kind of interesting. What was interesting how everything escalated and it turned into a fight between them. It's like, oh, they've had like this little tight relationship. And I guess it adds layers. Like you could see this was coming because even Olivia was talking about the fact that she was like, well, Manfred's gone. No surprise there. Lim's like, well, I actually thought he'd stay. She's like, I never trusted him. He's like, well, you don't trust anyone. She's like, that's what you love about me. Which I guess that plays a role in this now that they fought and everything. She stabbed him in the chest. It's hard to say whether she was 100% herself. I mean, because Manfred didn't have to cure her. He only had to cure Lemuel. It seems like, I mean, the way like, Fiji dealt with it this episode with like that woman Janice, she was kind of being controlled. But I guess it's like, I mean, to be fair, Olivia's not in a position, she's not in a vulnerable state to be messed with like everyone else was. Like when it tried to go after Creek was dealing with everything. She was in pain. So it made her an easy target, but it's like Olivia's kind of like, whether you want to look at it as too strong-willed, essentially, to be messed with. So, because at first I was like, oh, maybe she was kind of uncontrolled too. It was like, nah, because especially when it was all said and done, she was just like, get away from me, Lim, because of that fight. Which, yes, he wasn't himself, but I think I think it's definitely changed her perception of a lot of things in particular for her. Like, especially when it comes to Lim, like, she might not be all for Lim touching her anymore, even to leech off of her. Like, wasn't himself. Sure, this thing was kind of, pulling at the strings and the darkness in them, but still, the Rev didn't go that far, but, Lim did. So, and now it's going to put a damper in their relationship, because things got really physical. It shows you how much of a badass Olivia is, too, like, going toe-to-toe with a vampire like that. We already knew she was a badass, but even more so. But another big part in this episode was kind of interesting. Obviously, like, Zelda trying to get Manfred to move back, go back to Midnight. Obviously, he's running low on pills, so there's the whole, like, blocking ghost thing. Which, interestingly enough, like, Zelda ended up pointing out, okay, like, I kind of lied about why I wanted you to go to Midnight. Wasn't necessarily just to get away from Hightower. She actually had a vision that basically, essentially what Joe told Manfred, but she was too scared, I guess, too chicken to tell him the truth. So that's her real reason for sending him to Midnight, because it's his destiny. And obviously Manfred's running from it. I mean, because it's like what he does. Like, it's what they do is run. And even she takes fault in it because she's like, I raised you to be like this, Like, the fact is you like being in Midnight. That was becoming a new home for you. And it's like, because it seems like she took him in from a very young age because his mom left him there. Because we also find out that his mom didn't see spirits. So his grandma tries to, Zelda tried to spin it where it's like, oh, no, your mom loves you. She just wanted you to be somewhere with someone like me who can see what you see. So, you don't have to be kind of the weirdo, But it's like, maybe it was just too much because we still don't know about the conversation about his dad, which that whole thing kind of makes you go like, so Zelda, like, Manfred's mom must be Zelda's daughter. So we don't know where she is in all of this because it seems like Manfred grew up with her all, his life with Zelda. He probably has not crossed paths with his mom since he was a little kid. We don't know. The conversation didn't really cover, the flashbacks didn't really cover all that. But it seemed like, Zelda kept him in line by like having him not really dive too deeply into his powers. At least not kind of, I guess that kind of goes back and explains why Manfred wasn't all about revealing what he can do around everyone else when he kind of found out there's other supernatural things at Midnight, because he's just conditioned not to, because it's like he's kind of a weirdo, he's a freak, which I kind of called from the beginning, but we kind of see it even more of like, okay, it was kind of ingrained in him, like, don't do that, because Zelda raised him not to do that, not to embrace his gift, because she saw kids picking on him, calling him a weirdo because he's playing with a ghost of other kids. And so it's just, in Zelda's own way, she did the best she could. But I thought it was kind of interesting when Zelda was like, yeah, you don't be the man that I raised you to be better, because she raised him to kind of be like her. But even then, like, all Zelda ever did was try to do her best, and we actually kind of got to see like the end for her, like when she ultimately died. Obviously, a message constant throughout the episode is everything ends, but what matters is how you live. It's a motto like, everyone should keep in mind, myself included. But just I don't know. I thought it was kind of interesting too, because the whole like, Zelda was talking in the past about the whole conversation of moving on. I'm like, oh yeah, like the fact that she's still here. I was like, oh, is Manfred actually kind of keeping her here? It's like, no, um, he's not. It still never correlated in my head that she was always in the van. She never popped up anywhere else. It's like, oh yeah, because spirit's tied to specific objects. And it's like for them, like the reason why that van is so important because it was home for them. Like over all these years, it was their way of getting around and stuff like that. Like the whole like getting up and running thing was kind of like, oh yeah, look, if we need to, we can always leave because that's the beauty of having this van. I mean, sadly, he no longer has it now because it broke down. But for him, I guess letting go of Zelda, which she moves on, because at the end, I was like, oh, we're going to find out the reason why she's out here. I'm like, oh, she's not bound by the van. She's actually bound by him. He's secretly been keeping her this entire time. It's like, no, she's been staying by on her own free will because she, I think she finally found like, nope, the time she's done what she needed to do, because I'm sure that was the biggest thing that was keeping her because she didn't tell Manfred the truth. Now she has, and she's getting him to go back to Midnight because it's like, if he doesn't go back, a lot of people will die, especially the people he cares about too. So it's actually sad because there's that moment when he's in the back of all those bodies. Like, so you have any advice for grandma? He kind of turns and she's not there, and it's like, oh, that's sad. Because for the longest time, like even when because the thing is too, he never had to really deal with his grandmother's death that much because it's like, well, he could see her whatever he wants to, but now it's just kind of like, yeah, she's gone, and I'm not going to be able to see her again until the end comes, until like my life ultimately comes to an end and whatever waits for me in the afterlife, we can meet up then. I'm sure that's something in his mind, but it's actually pretty badass because I brought this up earlier in this season, seeing what Zelda could do, obviously making Lemuel the way he is. I was wondering like, oh, so what can Manfred do? And so obviously she's like, yeah, you have the power to compel like command spirits. Like even from the beginning, like that whole thing with him as a kid playing with the ghosts, that was kind of showing him like, that was to show like Manfred could interact with the ghosts. He can make them kind of like, like he doesn't have to submit to them, they can basically submit to him. So I was about to say he's the ghost whisperer, but then I was like nah, for probably like copyright infringement, let's not use those exact words. I mean, it's not going to affect me, but it's not like the show could actually use those words, I don't think. Trademark, copyright, all that. I'm sorry, I do apologize, I'm going off on yet another tangent, but that's cool that we are seeing his powers grow because he's like, you guys go, drag him back, basically drag the demon back into hell, which does beg the question, what happens to the spirits? Did they go with him, or did they just push him down into the afterlife and they just kind of went off on their own too? Not that their revenge was kind of like, not necessarily revenge, but they did what they needed to. And even Olivia's like, okay, when did you start being able to do that? And he's like, it's kind of an old trick, but Zelda told him no longer to like hold back what he can do. So I'm very interested going forward to see like what else he can do, like what else Manfred has under his sleeves. The sacrifices have been made, and the big dude himself is going to pop up soon enough, like and he's coming from Fiji, but Bobo was like, nah, that ain't happening. So I am curious to see what Bobo does, because I'm obviously like, like the whole conversation, like I said earlier, Olivia gave him silver bullets, but it's like, yeah, he has a huge arsenal. Not going to do that much against the supernatural, but still. Another question along those same lines, I was thinking about it, but I forgot to bring it up, is Manfred's dad. That's a whole conversation we haven't had yet either. Like, we hear a little bit about his mom now, so it's like, not unless we go back and end up finding out that Zelda was actually his dad's mom. Because it is, like, not unless it skipped a generation, but the fact of the matter is his mom couldn't see spirits, makes me think, now that I'm thinking about it in retrospect, it's like, no, Zelda's most likely his dad's mom. Maybe, I don't know, like, he never came up in conversation, not unless his dad died when he was younger or something like that. Maybe that kind of drew the divide between Manfred and his mom even further, because it's like, there's no one else to kind of complement that. Like I said, I don't know, we'll see. But because it is a hereditary thing, like passed down from generation to generation. So if Zelda was her mom, you would think that she'd be able to see it like Manfred can. So not unless, like I said, it skipped a generation, but I highly doubt it. So there's still that whole conversation about his dad. I'm very interested to find out more. And like I said, overall, like I said, a very good episode. I'm very interested to see where things go from here, especially because things aren't, like I said, all good between Olivia and Lim. They're in fact very awkward. What about Joe and Chewie? Are they coming back fairly soon or what? Because I accidentally saw the previews to the next episode last week, so I don't remember if I saw them in it or Nevertheless. And now that I'm sitting here thinking about it, and they never really outright brought it up, but it's like this thing feeds on death. I mean, that's an element they brought up, but they never kind of correlated to the fact of the matter is that why this thing has been acting as a beacon for supernatural? Because it's supposed to draw in a whole bunch of supernaturals who will come and kill people, which will end up ultimately being sacrifices for this thing. Is that what that's what? So basically, every bad thing, like every death by supernatural hands or whatever in this whole over the course of the well, not even just then, like even stuff Connor did, like the murders he committed, like all that was feeding this thing this entire time. So maybe that's why it acts as the beacon, why it tugs at the evil in people's heart, is just because it's for the sake of making them do terrible things, either to themselves or to other people, you know, to fill its belly. So that was just something I was thinking I just add in there as well. So turns out I was wrong. Last week I said the episode was going to be Monday and Tuesday. I thought it was, not unless they moved it, but nevertheless, it seems like it's actually going to be Wednesday. Whether or not they did change it, or maybe I would just completely missed it. But I could have sworn it was like Monday and Tuesday, but they might have moved it. But nevertheless, the next episode of Midnight Texas is you're getting another one this week, and it is on Wednesday, same time. So just keep that in mind. So. But really, that's all I want to talk about in this episode. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.